Hi everyone, my name is Deepak Punia and in this lecture we will solve GATE 2021 discrete mathematics questions. So let's see this first question. This is a GATE 2021 set 1 question. There are 5 bags each containing identical sets of 10 distinct chocolates. One chocolate is picked from each bag. The probability that at least 2 chocolates are identical, and these are the options. So let's solve it. He is saying there are 5 bags. Okay, so let's assume that the bags are B1, B2, B3, B4 and B5. So these are the 5 bags he is saying, and what he is saying that each of these bags they contain identical sets of 10 distinct chocolates. Let's assume that the chocolates are the set of chocolates, 10 chocolates we have, okay, 10 chocolates, distinct chocolates. So let's assume C1, C2 and so on C10. So let's assume these are the chocolates. Now in the question he is saying that each bag has this same set of 10 distinct chocolates. You can see in this set we have 10 chocolates, 10 distinct chocolates. Okay, each bag has this same set. B1 also has these chocolates, B2 also has these chocolates, B3 also has, and so on. Okay, now he is asking the probability that at least 2 chocolates are identical. Basically from B1 we are picking one chocolate, from B2 we are picking one chocolate and so on. So from each bag we are taking one chocolate. Okay, now when we do this, then it might happen that from B1 and from B2, let's assume we are taking the same chocolate. From B1 also we are taking C1, from B2 also we are taking C1. Okay, so in that case he is saying that the probability that at least 2 chocolates are identical, this we want to find out. Okay, so let's see how to solve it. So the probability, okay, the probability that at least 2 chocolates are identical, I can say probability of at least 2 chocolates greater than or equal to 2 chocolates identical. Okay, so this is he is asking identical. This probability we can write down like this. So probability such that at least 2 chocolates are identical, this is equal to 1 minus probability of no chocolate is identical. Okay, no chocolate is identical, no identical chocolate. Okay, so you can see, because the probability that at least 2 chocolates are identical, that is equal to 1 minus probability such that no identical chocolate we are picking. From each bag we are picking different chocolate. Okay, so let's find out the value of this, the probability such that no identical chocolate. Okay, now what this will be? So we want to find out the probability of such that from each bag we are picking different chocolate. Okay, so I can say no identical chocolate. What it will be? It will be basically, again, the probability that will be number of favorable cases divided by number of total cases. Favorable cases means when you are not taking any identical chocolate, from each bag you are taking different chocolate, that is the favorable cases. And total cases that will be basically from each bag, from any bag you are taking any chocolate. Okay, so let's find out this probability. So first we want to find out what is the total number of ways. Okay, so the total number of ways, what it means from each bag, from any bag we can take any chocolate. Okay, you can see we have total 5 bags, and if I want to find out the probability, if I want to find out the total number of ways, okay, of picking chocolates from these bags, then you can see in this bag B1 we have 10 chocolates, so I can take any one of them. Okay, from B1 when I take a chocolate, then I can take any one of these chocolates I can take. So how many choices I have? From B1 I can take any of the 10 chocolates. Okay, now from B2, in B2 also we have these chocolates, in this bag B2 also we have these 10 chocolates, so how many choices I have when I take a chocolate from bag B2, then again I have 10 choices, because any of these 10 chocolates I can take. So again I have 10 choices. Remember, right now I am finding the total number of ways to pick chocolates from these bags. Okay. Now, so from B3 again we have 10 ways. From B4 again we have 10 ways. From B5 again we have 10 ways. Because from each bag we can take any chocolate, and in each bag we have these 10 chocolates. So the total number of ways will be, you can apply the product rule. The product rule says that the total number of ways, that will be 10 multiplied by 10 and so on. So that will be basically 10 to the power 5. Okay. So I can say the total number of ways will be 10 to the power 5. So these are the ways of picking one chocolate from each bag. Okay. So for each bag we have 10 choices. So that's why total number of ways will be 10 to the power 5. Now let's find out number of ways to pick chocolate from each bag such that no identical chocolate. Basically from each bag we are picking different chocolate. Okay. So number of ways, let's find out. Number of ways such that no identical chocolate. Okay. No identical chocolate. So what it will be? Means from each bag we are taking different chocolate. From B1 if I take C1, then from B2 I cannot take C1, because I want to take from each bag, I want to take a different chocolate. Okay. So what this value will be? So what you can do to find this out, what you can do, you can see we have bag B1, we have bag B2, bag B3, B4 and B5. Okay. So from this bag B1 I can take any chocolate. Okay. I have 10 choices. I can pick any of the 10 chocolates I can pick. Okay. Now let's assume that I pick C1 from B1. Let's assume this chocolate C1 I am picking from B1. Okay. Now I cannot pick C1 from B2. Okay, because I want to find out number of ways such that no identical chocolate. Okay. From each bag I am taking different chocolate. So from B1 if I take C1, then from B2 I cannot take C1. Okay. So I can say that from B2 I have 9 ways. Okay. Because except C1 I can take any chocolate. From C2 to C10 I can take any chocolate. Now let's assume that from B2 I am taking, let's assume from B2 I am taking C2. Now from B3 I cannot take C1 comma C2. Okay. Because I want, from each bag I want different chocolate, so I cannot take C1 comma C2. So from B3 I have 8 ways. Okay. Similarly from B4 I have 7 ways, and from B5 I have 6 ways. Okay. So now you can apply the product rule. Now the number of ways such that no two identical chocolate. Okay. That will be, you can apply product rule, and that will be 10 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 8 multiplied by 7 multiplied by 6. Okay. So this will be the number of ways such that from each bag we are taking a different chocolate, and this is the total number of ways. So the probability such that no identical chocolate, that will be number of favorable cases, means this value, divided by number of total cases, means this value. So this probability will be 10 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 8 multiplied by 7 multiplied by 6 divided by 10 to the power 5. This will be the probability such that no two identical chocolate. Okay. From each bag we are taking different chocolate. But what we want this value. Okay. We want the probability such that at least two identical chocolate. Okay. At least two chocolates are identical. This is the value that we want. So what we want to find out? This value. So that will be 1 minus probability such that no two identical chocolates. So final answer will be, what will be the final answer that we want? The final answer you can see, that will be 1 minus this value. Okay. So final answer that we want to find out, that will be 1 minus, okay, this value you can see, 10 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 8 multiplied by 7 multiplied by 6 divided by 10 to the power 5. If you calculate this value, sorry, this is 10 to the power 5. Okay. So this is 10 to the power 5, you can see. So if you calculate this value, then what you will get? You will get this option A, 0.6 0.6976. So if you calculate this, you will get 0.6976. So the answer will be option A. So this is how you can do it. Okay, let's solve this question. This is a GATE 2021 set 1 question. Let G be a group of order 6 and H be a subgroup of G such that the order of H is greater than 1, less than 6. Which one of the following options is correct? G is basically he is asking whether G is cyclic, H is cyclic. So these are the options. Now let's solve it. So he is saying that G is a group of order 6, you can see. Okay, G is a group of order 6 and H is a subgroup of G such that the order of H, that is less than 6 and greater than 1. Okay, so for this question what you can do, you can apply the Lagrange theorem. Okay, so we have in group theory we have this, okay, we have this Lagrange this Lagrange theorem we have. Let G be a finite group and H is a subgroup, then order of H divides order of G. So this theorem we can apply in this question. Okay, you can see this is the theorem. This says that if you have any finite group G, then, and let's assume that the H is a subgroup of G, then order of H will divide order of G. Okay, so if you apply this theorem in this question, then what you will get, see, you can see order of G, if you see order of G, that is equal to 6. Okay, now so if you have any subgroup of G, any subgroup H if I have of G, then what will happen, the order of H that will divide, that will basically, you can see, that will divide order of G, means order of H will divide order of G. Okay, you can see like this. So what are the possible subgroups, what are the sizes of possible subgroups of G? So you can see what are the numbers that divide 6. You can see 1 divides 6, okay, 2 divides 6, okay, 3 divides 6 and 6 divides 6. So these are the possible orders, these are the possible orders of subgroup of G, these are the possible orders of H. Okay, but he is saying that the order of H is not 1, order of H is not 6. So what are the possible values? You can see order of H that can either be 2 or it can be 3. Remember, so these are the possible values for H, for order of H, either 2 or 3. Now what we can do, in group theory we have a standard result, okay, that every prime order group, every group of prime order that is cyclic. Okay, so this is a standard result that we have. So what we have, I can say we have a theorem that we study in, okay, so in group theory we study a theorem. That theorem we can very easily we can prove using this okay, using this Lagrange's result we can solve, we can very easily prove that theorem. Okay, what it says that every group of prime order, okay, I can say every group of prime order is cyclic. Okay, so this is a theorem that we study in group theory. Every group of prime order is cyclic. So you can see this 2 is prime number, 3 is prime number. So H, you can see this, the possible order of H is either 2 or 3, and every group of prime order that is cyclic. So definitely H is cyclic. So we can say that H is definitely cyclic. Okay, so for H I can say that this H is definitely cyclic, because you can see very easily, you can see every group of prime order that is cyclic. Okay, so this, the order of H is either 2 or 3 and both are, you can see, prime number. So the order of so I can say that this group H, this is definitely cyclic. Okay, now let's see about G. So G, what information we have for G? The only information that we have is that G is a group of order 6. Okay, so but the order 6 group, they may not be cyclic. Okay, we can have one example I can give you. Okay, so if you have a group of order 6, that may or may not be cyclic. Remember, every group of prime order, that is definitely cyclic, but if you have a group of non-prime order, you can see 6 is a non-prime value. So if you have a group of non-prime order, then that may or may not be cyclic. Okay, so for example, if you want to find out, do we have a group of order 6 which is not cyclic? Yes, we have. That is S3. Okay, that is your permutation group of order 6, or you can say that is your permutation group, or you can call it symmetric group. So in group theory, we study some standard groups we study, okay, and one of those standard groups that we study is called symmetric group. Okay, this symmetric group, or you can call it permutation group. Okay, permutation group. Okay, we denote it by Sn. Either you can call it symmetric group or you can call it permutation group, and we denote it by Sn. Okay, so you can notice, okay, in group theory, this is a very fundamental group that we study. Okay, and if you notice S3, this is a symmetric group of degree 3. Remember, degree 3 means in this S3 basically we have total 6 elements. And what are those 6 elements? In this S3 we have all the permutations of 1, 2, 3. So if you have, for example, if you have 1, 2, 3, okay, then all the permutations of this, how many permutations we have? For a set of 3 elements, the total number of permutations, that will be basically 3 factorial. Okay, so in this S3 we have total 6 elements. 3 factorial is equal to 6. So in this S3 basically we have total 6 elements, and those 6 elements are permutations of this 1, 2, 3. Okay, so total 6 elements we have. For example, maybe one element is 1, 2, 3, another element is 1, 3, 2, another element is 2, 1, 3, another element is 2, 3, 1, another element is 3, 1, 2, and the last element is 3, 2, 1. Okay, so this is your group S3. Okay, now this S3 group that we study in group theory, this is not cyclic. So that's why you can see a group of order 6 that may not be cyclic, and this is the example. Okay, you can see a group of order 6 which is not cyclic, that is S3. Okay, so that's why you can say that G may not be cyclic, but H is definitely cyclic. So what is the answer? Answer will be option C. Okay, G may not be cyclic, but H is always cyclic. Okay, so this option C is the answer. Okay, let's solve this question. This is a GATE 2021 set 1 question. Okay, from discrete mathematics. Let's see. He is saying there are 6 jobs, okay, with distinct difficulty levels. Okay, so you have total 6 jobs or 6 tasks, and each of these job has distinct different difficulty level. Okay, and we have 3 computers with distinct processing speed. So we have basically 3 different computers and 3 different jobs. Okay, each job is assigned to a computer such that, so we are assigning each job, we are assigning to a computer such that the fastest computer gets the toughest job, the slowest computer gets the easiest job. Okay, and then every computer gets at least one job. The number of ways in which this can be done. So this is a very easy question. What he is saying, let's solve it. So he is saying that we have total 6 jobs. Okay, let's assume that those 6 jobs are J1, J2, J3, J4, J5 and J6. So we have total 6 jobs of distinct difficulty level. So all of these jobs, they have distinct difficulty level. Maybe let's assume that J1, this job J1, this is the easiest. Okay, so this is the order, let's assume. So you can see I am assuming that J1 is the easiest job and J6 is the toughest job. Now what we have, he is saying that we have 3 different computers, 3 computers with distinct processing speed. Let's assume these 3 computers are C1, C2, C3. Okay, so let's assume that C1 has the less, you can see, least processing speed, and let's assume that C3 has the most processing speed. Okay, now in this question what he is saying that what we are doing, we are assigning each job to a computer such that the fastest computer will get toughest job and the slowest computer will get easiest job. So what we are doing, okay, this easiest job, this we are assigning to C1 because this is the easiest job, so we are assigning it to the slowest computer, and this is the toughest job, so we are assigning it to fastest computer because C3 is the fastest computer and C1 is the slowest computer. So this is what we are doing. And so okay, after this he is saying that every computer must get at least one job. See, already C1 has got J1, already C3 has got J6. So far C1 has a job, at least one job C1 has. So far C3 also has at least one job, okay, but right now C2 does not have any job, okay, and we want to assign each of these job to at least one of these computers, okay. So the number of ways, so what that will be, what we want to do, we want to assign to each computer, we want to assign at least one job, okay. So that we can do like this. So basically number of ways, I can, what I want to find out, I want to find out number of ways, okay, that such that every computer gets at least one job, okay. So number of ways such that, and remember C1 and C3, they are already getting at least one job, so I can say that number of ways such that C2 gets at least one job, okay. Number of ways such that C2 gets at least one job. This is what they want, this is what they want us to find out. Remember here, let me again repeat. See, he is saying that every computer gets at least one job, but remember we have already given this job G1 to C1 and this job J6 to C3. So to these computers we have already given at least one job, okay. So what is remaining, the remaining computer is C2. So we want to find out the number of ways such that C2 gets at least one job, okay, and we want to distribute these jobs in these computers. So this we can very easily find out. This will be basically the total number of ways minus number of ways such that C2 does not get any job, okay. So I can say that total number of ways minus number of ways such that C2 does not get any job. C2 does not get any job, okay. So this is what we want to find out. What is the total number of ways? Total number of ways, remember J1 is already, you can see J1 is already running on C1 and we have already given J6 to C3. So the total number of ways, we can only give these jobs, these 4 jobs we can give to any of these computers. So for each job we have 3 choices, okay. For J2 I have 3 choices, I can give this J2 to C1, C2, C3, any of these computers I can assign it. So for J2 I have basically 3 choices. For this job also I have 3 choices because I want to find out total number of distributions, okay, total number of distributions of these jobs to these computers. So every job basically has 3 ways, okay, because for example this J3, I can assign this J3 to any of these computers, okay. So for each job we have 3 ways. So the total number of ways, you can apply product rule here, and the product rule will say that the total number of job will be the total number of ways will be 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3, that will be 3 power 4, okay. We have basically applied the product rule, okay. So this product rule we have applied. Okay, now number of ways such that C2 does not get a job, okay. We want to find out number of ways such that this C2, this does not get any job, okay. So what that will be in this case, okay, if I want to find out this case, then what is happening here, then any of these jobs, they are not going to C2, okay. So J1 is already assigned to C1, so there is no choice here, okay, and J6 is already assigned to C3, so there is no choice here also. But for J2, for J3, for J4 and for J5, for each of these jobs we have 2 choices, Why two choices? Because we don't want to assign any job to C2. Okay, so that's why we can assign this J2 to either C1 or C3. So for this J2 we have two choices. For this J3 we have two choices. Okay, so for this J3 you can see, for this J3 you can see we have total two choices. So for this J3 also we have two choices. For J4 also we have two choices. For J5 also we have two choices. Okay, so that's why the number of ways such that C2 does not get any job, that will be 2 power 4. So this will be 3 power 4 minus 2 power 4. You can calculate very easily, you can calculate this value. What is this? This is 81 minus this is 16. Okay, so that this you can calculate 65. So the answer will be 65. So what we have done here, let me just repeat. We have total 6 jobs with different difficulty level. So J1 is the easiest, J6 is this is the toughest. Okay, and we have 3 computers, C1, C2, C3. C1 is you can say slowest computer, C3 is the you can say fastest computer. Now he is saying that we are giving the easiest job to C1. Okay, easiest job we are giving to slowest computer, and the toughest job we are giving to fastest computer. So this J1 and J6, these jobs we have already given to C1, C3. Okay, now for the remaining jobs, for these remaining 4 jobs, these 4 jobs we can give to any computer. Okay, but he is saying that the number of ways such that every computer must get at least one job. So remember, C1 already has at least one job, C3 already has at least one job. So basically what he want us to find out, he want us to find out number of ways such that C2 gets at least one job. So that will be basically total number of ways minus number of ways such that C2 does not get any job. Okay, total number of ways. For each of these 4 jobs we have, for each of these 4 jobs we have 3 choices. For J2 we have 3 choices, for J3 3 choices, and so on. So total number of ways will be 3 power 4 minus number of ways C2 does not get any job, means none of these jobs, okay, none of these jobs they go to C2. So for every job we have 2 choices. Okay, for every job we have 2 choices. Every job either can go to C1 or it can go to C3. Okay, so you can apply the product rule here and you will get minus 2 power 4. So this will be, so answer will be 65. Okay, in this lecture we will solve this GATE 2021 set 1 question. Okay, so a relation R is said to be circular if ARB and BRC together imply CRA. Which of the following options is correct? So when we study relations, then in relations we study reflexive relation, transitive relation, symmetric relation, antisymmetric relation. But he has given a new definition. He is saying that a relation R is said to be circular. So a new type of relation he has given. Okay, and the definition is already given to us. A new relation he is defining, the new definition that is also given. Now we need to analyze these options. Okay, first we will try to understand this definition of circular relation, what he is saying. So circular relation means, let's see here, he is saying that circular, a relation is called circular when, if let's assume that A is related to B, it means A is related to B. Let's assume that B is related to C. So if A is related to B, B is related to C, then in circular relation what will happen? Then this C will be related to A. C will be related to A. This is the definition of circular relation. Basically he is saying that if A is related to B, okay, B is related to C, then circular relation, circular, that is the meaning of circular, because then C will be related to A. So you can see circular relation. Okay, so this is the definition. We have seen the meaning of the definition. Okay, if A is related to B, B is related to C, then what will happen? Then this C will be related to A. Okay, so this is the definition of circular relation. Now you can see the first option. He is saying if a relation S is reflexive and circular, then S is a equivalence relation. Okay, so first we will solve option A. So let's see. He is saying if you have a relation which is already reflexive and circular, then can we say that it is an equivalence relation? You know what is the equivalence relation, okay? So let's solve it. What is the equivalence relation? Equivalence relation is a relation, equivalence relation. So we already know that equivalence relation is a relation which satisfies three properties. One is reflexive, second is symmetric, and the third is transitive, okay? So equivalence relation is a relation which satisfies these three properties. It should be reflexive, and it should be symmetric, and it should be transitive, okay? Now, first we will prove that if a relation R is reflexive and circular, then this relation R will be symmetric. First we will prove it. This is the true statement, okay? If you have a relation which is reflexive and circular, then that relation will definitely be symmetric. So how can we prove it, okay? So first let me solve this statement 1, okay? So the proof of this statement 1. Let's see. What is the proof? He is saying that the relation is already reflexive. Reflexive means for every element basically, okay, so we can say basically say that for every element x, we can say that x is related to x. This is the meaning of reflexive relation, means every element is related to itself, okay, x is related to itself. This is the definition of reflexive relation. Now, we want to prove that if your relation is reflexive and circular, then it is symmetric. Let's prove it. Let's assume that A is related to B, okay, means let's assume that A is related to B, okay. I can this I can write like this also, okay, I can write like this also, that A is related to B. Let's assume, okay. So what we are doing, assume, okay, assume A is related to B, okay. Now see, if A is related to B, and we already know that the relation is reflexive, so B is also related to B. You can see, we are assuming that A is related to B, and we already know that the relation is reflexive, so B is related to B. Now, from these two, we already know that the relation is circular, okay, relation is circular. So see, A is related to B, A is related to B, B is related to B. So circular, the definition of circular relation says that this B will be related to A. So from these two I can say that B will be related to A. So this is the definition of symmetric relation. What we have proven? We have proven that if you assume that A is related to B, okay, if A is related to B, then we have proven that B will be related to A. And this is the definition of symmetric relation. Symmetric relation says that if this symmetric relation, this says that if A is related to B, okay, so what is the definition of symmetric relation? It's the symmetric relation definition. Let's see. So symmetric relation means if A is related to B, okay, if A is related to B, then B should be related to A. This is the definition of symmetric relation, and this we have proven, okay. So this statement is true. If a relation is reflexive and circular, then it is symmetric. This statement is true, okay. Now we will prove that if a relation is both reflexive and circular, then it is a transitive. This statement is also true, okay. Remember, we have already proven this statement, okay, and if we prove this statement, okay, this statement means if a relation R is reflexive and circular, then it will be transitive. If we prove this statement also, then we can say that relation R is equivalence relation, because R is already reflexive and we have proven that R is symmetric. If we prove that R is transitive, then we can say that R is R is equivalence relation, okay, because these are the three properties of equivalence relation. So now we will prove this statement, okay. So let's see this statement I am going to prove. If R is reflexive, okay, so let's assume you have a relation R, okay, and it is already given that this relation R is reflexive, and also it is already given that this relation R is circular. And remember, we have already proven that if R is reflexive and symmetric, then if R is reflexive and circular, then it is symmetric. So I can say that you have a relation R, it is given that it is reflexive, it is given that it is circular, then automatically it means that it is symmetric also. This we have proven. Okay, reflexive and circular implies symmetric. So these are the three properties of the relation. Now can we prove that R is transitive also? Yes, we can prove. Okay, how can we prove? Assume that A is related to B and B is related to C. Okay, let's assume that A is related to B and B is related to C. Okay, then remember the definition of transitive relation. Okay, so let me write it down. So the definition of transitive relation, if you see, so what is the definition of transitive relation? Transitive relation says that if A is related to B and B is related to C, then both of these, then A should be related to C. Means if A is related to B, okay, if A is related to B, B is related to C, then transitive relation says that A should be related to C. Okay, A should be related to C. This is the definition of transitive relation. So that is the reason I am assuming that A is related to B, B is related to C. Then notice that R is circular. So what it will mean? It will mean that if A is related to B, B is related to C, then because R is circular, so C will be related to A. Okay, so you can see basically C will be related to A. And remember, because R is symmetric, so C is related to A, it means A is related to C. Okay, so you can see, okay, from this circular and from this symmetric, we have shown that A is related to C, and hence we can say that the relation R is transitive, because you can see if A is related to B, B is related to C, then you can see A is related to C. You can see A is related to C. Okay, so we have proven that if you have a relation R which is reflexive and circular, then that relation will be symmetric and that relation will be transitive. So both of these, okay, statements we have proven. So we can say that this relation R will be equivalence relation. Okay, so this is a true statement. Statement 1, this is true. If a relation S is reflexive and circular, then this statement is equivalence relation. This is true statement. Okay, we have proven it. Now let's see option B, option C, option D. Option B is saying that if a relation S is circular and symmetric, then it is equivalence relation. This is false statement. Okay, so we can very easily prove that this is a false statement. What we will do, okay, so you can see here. Okay, for this option B, what I am going to do, I am going to give you a counter example. Okay, we are going to take a relation which is circular and symmetric but not equivalence relation. Okay, so I can very easily give you a counter example for this statement B. Consider this relation R. Okay, or you can consider this relation S. Okay, does not matter. Okay, so consider this relation R where let's assume that A is related to B. Okay, so you can say, okay, A is related to A. Let's consider this relation R. A is related to A. So let's consider, he is saying relation S is circular and symmetric. So let's consider this relation S. Okay, where let's assume A comma A, means A is related to A. Okay, this relation S, let's assume this relation S on set A comma B comma C. So we are defining a relation S. We are defining a relation S on this base set. This is our base set, and in this relation S, what is happening? You can see A is related to A. You can see that this relation S, this is symmetric. You can see this relation S, this is symmetric. Okay, you can see this is symmetric, and this is circular also. You can see A is related to A, so this is circular also. But you can see this is not reflexive. okay, because in the reflexive relation every element must be related to itself, but in this relation you can see B is not related to B, C is not related to C. So that is the reason you can see this is not a equivalence relation, okay, this S is not a equivalence relation. So that's why this option B is false. Okay, let's see option C. Option C is saying that if a relation S is reflexive and symmetric, then S is equivalence relation. This statement is also false. This statement, because remember, if you have a relation which is reflexive and symmetric, it does not mean that it will be transitive. Okay, so because this type of relation may not be transitive, so we cannot say that it will be equivalence relation. Let me give you a counter example for this. So you can see for this option C, consider this relation. I am defining a relation as on base set. So this is my base set A, B, C. Okay, I am defining a relation as like this. Consider this relation as. In this, what I am doing, let's assume A is related to A, because this S must be reflexive and this must be symmetric. Okay, so A is related to A, B is related to B, C is related to C. So this is reflexive, okay, because every element is related to itself. And let's assume A is related to B. So because it should be symmetric, so B is related to A is related to C, and C is related to A. So consider this relation, you can see. Okay, this relation as you can consider. What is happening here? You can see it is reflexive because every element is related to itself. Okay, also you can see this is symmetric also, because if A is related to B, then B is related to C. If A is related to C, then C is related to A. Okay, so this is a, you can see this is a reflexive relation and this is a symmetric relation. But this relation, you can see this relation is not transitive. Why this is not transitive? Because you can see here what is happening. See, B is related to A. You can notice here. Okay, B is related to A. So let me pull it out here. You can see B is related to A. Okay, and you can see A is related to C. But you can see transitive relation says that if B is related to A is related to C, then in transitive relation B should be related to C. Okay, so you can see B should be related to C, but you can see B is not related to C. In this relation you can see B is not related to C. So that's why this is not transitive relation. This relation as this is not transitive relation, and hence I can say that this option C is also false. Okay, so this is how you can do. Now let's see option D. Option D is saying if a relation S is transitive and circular, then S is equivalence relation. This option is also false. Okay, so what we can do, we can again, let me give you a counter example for this option D also. Let's focus on option D. Okay, so consider this relation. Consider a relation R on this set A, B, C, and consider this relation R. So you can see, consider this relation A comma A. You can notice that this relation R, okay, in this relation we only have one pair, that is A is related to A. Okay, so in this relation you can see this relation R, that is transitive also, okay, that is circular also, because there is only one pair A comma A. So you can see this is transitive and this is circular, but you can see this is not reflexive. This relation R, you can see this is not reflexive. So that is the reason I can say that this is not equivalence relation. Okay, so you can see this is transitive and circular but not equivalence relation. So option D is also false. So we have seen option C is also false, option B is also false, and option A is correct. Okay, so this is the answer for this question. In this question we can make some variations also, okay, because this is a new definition that they have given, so more variations you can make. So here you can see some more variations you can make. Okay, let's see these variations. Remember, these are some additional variations that we can make. Okay, in the question is over. Answer we have seen, option A is the answer, and we have seen why option B, C, D, why they are wrong. That also we have seen. So the question is over, but we can create some more variations. Okay, for example, this variation we can create. This statement, if you see, if you have a relation R which is equivalence relation, then it will be reflexive and circular. Okay, so you can see, if you notice this option A, this is saying that if you have a relation S which is reflexive and circular, then that implies equivalence relation. Okay, but actually the converse is also true. The converse of this statement A, that is also true. What it means? It means that if you have a relation R which is equivalence relation, then it will definitely be circular. Okay, so how can we prove it? So let's see the proof of this statement. What we are going to see, this is the proof of this statement we are going to see. Let's see. Okay, so let's assume that R is equivalence relation. Because R is equivalence relation means it is reflexive, symmetric and transitive. Okay, now I want to prove that R is circular also. Very easily I can prove. See, let's assume that A is related to B and assume that B is related to C. Okay, then remember, I am assuming that A is related to B, B is related to C. Now remember, this R is equivalence relation, so you can say that A is related to C. Also remember, because R is a symmetric relation, remember R is a equivalence relation and every equivalence relation is reflexive and symmetric and transitive. Okay, so because this R is a symmetric relation, so from this A or C, I can also say that C is related to A. So you can notice that if A is related to B, B is related to C, then you can see C is related to A. Okay, so what is happening here? If A is related to B, B is related to C, then you can see C is also related to A. So this is the definition of circular relation. So we have proven that if you have a relation R which is equivalence relation, then R must be circular. Okay, so this is how you can prove. Okay, so we have seen statement A in the option A, and this statement means statement in option A, that is also true, and converse of that statement is also true, means this statement is also true. So we can say that, finally we can say that a relation S is reflexive and circular if and only if S is an equivalence relation. So this is the if and only if, means if you have reflexive and circular, then it will mean it is a equivalence relation. If you have equivalence relation, then it will mean that it is circular. Okay, so this is some variations you can make. You can create some more variations in discrete mathematics. Okay, in any subject you can create more variations from the questions. Okay, if you have a question, then for that question you can see what more possible variations they can make. Okay, so for example, you can see these variations also you can see. Let's see whether this statement is true or false. Okay, if a relation R is transitive and circular, let's assume you have a relation R which is transitive and circular, then can you say that it is symmetric? Okay, can you say that it is symmetric? This is false. This statement is false. And the counter example you can see very easily. Consider this relation R. Let's assume A is related to B. You can see this relation is transitive because there is only one pair, A is related to B. Okay, so you can see this relation R is transitive also, this relation R is circular also, but this relation R is not symmetric. Okay, so that's why you can say this statement is false. Similarly, you can create more variations. If a relation R is transitive and circular, then it is reflexive. This is also false, because same counter example you can use, same counter example. Okay, because you can see this relation R, this is transitive, you can see this relation R, this is transitive and this is circular, but this relation R is not reflexive. So that is the reason, okay, this statement is also false. So in this question, what we have seen the original GATE 2021 question. This is the original question. We have seen why statement A is true. We have seen the proof of it. Okay, we have seen why statement B, C, D, why they are false. We have seen counter example of them. Then we have seen some variations. What I have shown you, we have seen that this statement A is true and the converse of this statement is also true. We have seen the proof of it. Okay, and then some more variations we have seen. Okay, so this is how you can do. Okay, so this is all about this question. Okay, in this lecture we will solve this question. This is a GATE 2021 question in set 1 from discrete mathematics. Okay, let's see. in an undirected connected planar graph G, there are 8 vertices, 5 faces, number of edges. So this is a very easy question, because in this question we can apply Euler formula. Okay, so what is Euler formula? So you can see, if you have undirected connected planar graph, then in any undirected connected planar graph, what we can do, see, Euler formula says that if G is if you have a graph G which is undirected, okay, and connected, okay, so if you have a graph G which is undirected connected planar graph, then in this graph G, how many faces this graph G will have? Okay, so if you have a planar graph, then in that planar graph, how many faces will be there? So we have a Euler formula for this, and Euler formula says that, okay, this Euler formula, it says that number of faces will be f. F means number of faces. This will be equal to number of edges minus number of vertices plus 2. Okay, so this is a very simple Euler formula for undirected connected planar graph. Okay, we can apply this. In this question he is saying that there are 8 vertices, so number of vertices is 8. Okay, so number of edges minus number of vertices is 8 plus 2, and number of faces, you can see there are 5 faces, so number of faces is 5. So from here, okay, so number of faces here you can see that is 5. Okay, so number of faces you can see that is 5. Now from this we can find out number of edges. So you can see that number of edges, that will be, you can see that is 11. Okay, so this is a easy question. Okay, so in this video we will see this question from GATE 2021 set 1. Okay, so this is a question from propositional logic. Let's see what it is saying. It is saying that let P and Q be 2 propositions. Consider the following formula in proposition logic. So P and Q, these are 2 propositions that we have, and these are 2 propositional logic formula. Which one of the following choices is correct? He is asking for tautology. We know what is a tautology. So let's see what is a tautology. If you have any propositional logic formula, let's assume you have formula G. Okay, so this G is a propositional logic formula. Then we say that G is tautology. Okay, so we say that this G, this is a tautology if and only if G is always true. Okay, G is always true. Means in all the cases G must be true. Okay, so this is the definition of tautology. Now for these 2 formula we need to see which of them is tautology. Okay, S1. So first we will check for this formula S1. This is basically saying that negation of P. Okay, this is a negation operator. So negation of P, conjunction P over Q, this is disjunction operator, and this is implication. So let's see this S1. Okay, for this S1 we will check. So let's see S1. Now in this S1 he is saying that, so negation of P and P over Q implies Q. Okay, so this is our, you can see this is our S1. Now let's see how to solve it. So we can solve this question by many different methods. Okay, first I will solve it by a direct method that we can use. So let me solve it by method 1. So what is method 1 to solve it? So we can apply in this question, you can see this S1 is an implication statement. If you see this formula, this is an implication formula. Okay, implication formula means this is like alpha implies beta. Okay, so this type of statement we call it implication statement. You can see this S1 is also implication statement, because this is your alpha and this is your beta. Okay, so you can see alpha implies beta. So when we have this type of implication statement, then what we can do, this implication statement alpha implies beta, this is equivalent to alpha dash plus beta, means negation of alpha plus beta. This plus means disjunction operator. Okay, so alpha dash or beta. Now let's apply this. So what we will get? We will get negation of P and P or Q. Okay, whole negation. Okay, whole negation plus Q plus beta, that is Q. So what we have done? We have just applied this formula because we know that alpha implies beta. This is equivalent to alpha dash plus beta. Now here you can apply the De Morgan formula. What is De Morgan formula? So let's see De Morgan formula also. So the De Morgan formula says that De Morgan formula, this says that if you have alpha and beta whole complement, okay, whole negation, then that is basically alpha negation or beta negation. Okay, next, if you have alpha or beta whole negation, that is basically equal to alpha negation and beta negation. So these are De Morgan formula. We can apply these here. Okay, so let's see what we will get. We will get basically this is your alpha, this is your beta. So alpha and beta negation, that will be alpha negation. What is negation of negation of P? That will be P. Okay, or negation of this, that is P or Q negation plus Q. Okay, now again what we can do? We can again apply De Morgan formula here. So we will get P or, okay, so here if we apply the De Morgan formula, then what we will get? We will get P dash and Q dash, okay, plus Q. So this is what we got. Okay, let's, so now what we can do? So let me remove it. Okay, so now from here what we can do? So from here you can see we have basically we have P or P dash plus, sorry, P dash and Q dash. Okay, sorry. So we have P dash and Q dash plus Q. Okay, so this we have. So from here now you can notice this is basically P plus P dash Q dash plus Q. And also in propositional logic we have a formula. So let me write it down here. So we have a formula which says that P plus P dash alpha, that is basically equal to P plus alpha. Okay, so this formula we have, this is a very standard formula in propositional logic. Okay, P plus P dash alpha, that is equal to P plus alpha. So we can apply this here. Okay, we have P plus P dash alpha, this Q dash is our alpha. So what we will get? We will get P plus Q dash plus Q. And what is Q plus Q dash? That is true. Okay, so P plus true. And what is P plus true? P plus true is always true. So you can see finally we got true. Okay, so we can say that this S1, if you see this formula S1, this is basically equivalent to true, means this S1 is always true. So S1 is a tautology. Okay, so we have seen this is method 1 and S1 is a tautology. Now by this method what we will do? We will see this S2 also. Okay, so let's see this S2. By the same method we will see S2. Okay, in this S2 what he is saying? So okay, this in S2 he is saying Q implies negation P and P plus Q. So let's see. So Q implies negation P and P plus Q. Okay, so remember this plus is basically disjunction. Okay, so sometimes what we are doing, either we can write it plus or we can write it disjunction. Okay, similarly we can for example when we write P conjunction Q, we can also write it direct PQ. Okay, so like this. Similarly when we have negation P, we can also write it P dash. Okay, so all these are basically different notations. Okay, now you can see, so this is our S2. Now let's solve it. So again what we will do? Again we can apply the same formula that we have seen. If you have alpha implies beta, then you can write it alpha dash plus beta. Okay, so let's do this. Now this is our alpha, you can see this is our alpha, and you can see this is our beta. Okay, now let's apply it. So alpha dash means basically q dash plus beta. What is beta? This is exactly same. So this will be basically p dash and okay p plus q. Okay. Now from here what we can do, q dash plus, here we can apply the distributive property. Okay, distributive law says that, so p dash and p plus q. So if we apply distributive law, so what we will get? We will get p dash and p plus p dash and q. Okay, what is p into p dash? Basically p conjunction p dash. What is that? That is false. Okay, so q dash plus, this is basically false, and false plus anything, remember this is false, so I can say that this is basically false plus p dash q, and false plus anything, false plus alpha is alpha. Okay, so we will get q dash plus alpha, that is p dash q. Now here again we can apply the same formula. I told you that in propositional logic, whenever we have something like p plus p dash alpha, then what we can write it? We can write it p plus alpha. Okay, so we can apply it here. This is basically our, you can say, okay, q dash plus q into p dash. So when we apply this formula, then what we will get? We will get q dash plus p dash. So remember this q dash plus p dash, okay, this is not true, you can see. Okay, we can make it false. When p is true, q is true, okay, p and q both are true, then what will happen? Then this can become false. So hence we can say S2 is not a tautology. Okay, S2 is not a tautology because S2 is not equivalent to true. We can make S2 false. Okay, what you need to do? Just make p equal to true, q equal to true, then what you will get? You will get S2 equal to true. Okay, so that's why you can say S2 is not a tautology. Okay, so this is how you can solve it, and hence we can say that S1 is a tautology but S2 is not a tautology, so option B is the correct answer. Okay, but this is just a method 1. Let's see another method to solve the same question. Okay, now okay, let's see the method 2. So what we are going to do in this method, what we are going to do, we are going to use the definition of implication. Whenever you have an implication statement, let's assume you have an implication statement G, alpha implies beta. Okay, whenever you have this type of implication statement, then remember, implication statement is always true except only in one case. There is only one case which can make implication statement false. What is that case? When alpha is equal to true, when this is true and this is false. Okay, so you can see when alpha, this is basically your antecedent. Okay, whenever you have an implication statement, alpha implies beta, then this alpha is basically antecedent, this is called antecedent, and this is called consequent. So this implication statement is false only when alpha is true and beta is false. This is the only case, remember, this is the only case in which this implication statement can become false. In all other cases, implication statement is always true. Okay, so what we will see whether this case is possible or not. If this case is not possible, okay, if this case means when alpha is true, then beta is false. Okay, if this case is not possible, then we can say that implication statement is never false. Never false means always true. Okay, similarly, if this case is possible, okay, if this case is possible means when alpha is true, then it is possible for beta to be false, then we can say that this implication statement is false. Okay, so this method we will apply here. Okay, so let's see what is our S1. Okay, let's see first S1. S1 is basically saying that, okay, negation of, let's see, you can see this is our S1. So negation of P and P plus Q implies Q. This is our implication statement of S1. Okay, now in this you can see again the same thing. This is our alpha. You can notice that this is our alpha. Okay, this is our alpha and this is our beta. This is the implication statement, alpha implies beta. Okay, so what I told you that let's see whether this case can happen or not, whether this case is possible or not. When alpha is true, beta is false, whether this okay, this situation is possible or not. So let's see. So for this situation, you know that beta should be false. So let's assume beta is false. Okay, so how can I make beta equal to false? If I want to make beta equal to false, remember beta is q, so basically q should be false. So what I have done, I have made beta equal to false. Remember, there is only one way to make this beta false, because beta equal to q. Okay, there is only one way to make q false, that is q equal to false. Okay, so now what I will see, I want to see whether I can make alpha true or not. If I can make alpha true, then it means that this case is possible. Okay, because already I have made beta false. Now if I can make alpha true, then it means that this case is possible, and this is the only case which can make our formula false. Okay, so let's see whether I can make this alpha true or not. Okay, so remember, q is already false, so this is our p dash and this is p, or q is already false, so p or q, p or false. What is p or false? P or false is p. Okay, so p dash and p. What is p dash and p? That is equal to false. So you can see that, you can notice that what is happening here. If I make this beta false, then I cannot make this alpha true. Okay, if I make this beta false, then I cannot make this alpha true. So this case is not possible. Alpha is true and beta is false. This case is not possible. If this case is not possible, then this implication statement also cannot become false. Okay, so this implication statement is never false. Hence we can say this implication statement is always true. Okay, so this is how you can solve it. So very easy method you can see. Okay, let's apply this same method for S2. Okay, so let's see. For S2, what is our S2? S2 is saying that Q implies P dash and P plus Q. Okay, this is our S2. Okay, now let's see. Again, in this S2, you can notice that this is our alpha and this is our beta. Okay, so the same thing we will do. We want to see whether this case is possible or not. Which case? Basically, alpha implies beta. This is false. This is false. This is false only when, the only situation, okay, the only case when this alpha implies beta can be false. Okay, only when alpha is true and beta is false. So this is the only case in which implication statement can be false. So I want to see whether this case is possible or not. If this is possible, then I can say our implication statement can become false. Because our implication statement can become false, so our implication statement is not tautology. Okay, so what I will do, I will see whether this case is possible or not. Let me make alpha true. Alpha is q, so how can I make it true? The only situation is q equal to true. If I want to make alpha equal to true, then q should be true. Okay, now after making alpha true, now I want to see whether I can make beta false or not. I will try to make beta false. If I can do this, basically if I can make beta false, then I can say that this implication statement, this is not tautology. If I cannot make beta false, then what it means? It means that this case is not possible, and hence I can say that S2 is tautology. So let's see this beta. This is P dash and P plus Q. What is Q? Q is true. Now P plus true, what is that? That is true. So P dash and true. So you can see, okay, this P dash and true. What is P dash and true? That is P dash. Now you can see I can make it false. You can see this P dash, I can make it false. Yes, very easily I can make it false. What I will do, I just need to make P equal to true. If I make P equal to true, then what will happen? Then this beta will become false. And remember, this alpha is true. Okay, so you can see this alpha is true, and I can make beta false. You can see this beta, I can make it false. So I can say that this implication statement can become false. Because this can become false, so I can say that this S2 is not a tautology, because tautology means, tautology is a formula which is never false, but this formula S2 we can make it false, and hence we can say S2 is not a tautology. Okay, so this is second method to solve this question. Okay, so we have seen two methods, two different methods we have seen to solve this question, and whichever method you feel more convenient, okay, that you can use. So okay, so the answer will be option B. Okay.